Morpurgo Kensukes' Kingdom. Chapter 1. Peggy Sue. I disappeared on the night before my 12th birthday, July 28th, 1988. And now can I at last tell the whole extraordinary story, the true story. Kensuke made me promise that I would say nothing at all, until at least 10 years had passed. It was almost the last thing he said to me. I promised, and because of that, I had to live out a lie. I could let sleeping lie sleep on, but more than 10 years have passed now. I've done school, done college, and had time to think. I owe it to my family and friends, all of whom I've deceived for so long, to tell the truth about my long disappearance, about how I lived to come back from the dead. But there is another reason for speaking out now, a far, far better reason. Kensuke was a great man, a good man, and he was my friend. I want the whole world to know him as I knew him. Until I was nearly 11, until the letter came, life was just normal. There were the 4 of us in the house, my mother, my father, me and Stella Artois, that is, my one ear up and one ear down, black and white sheepdog, who always seemed to know what was about to happen before it did. But even she could not have foreseen how that letter was going to change our lives forever. Thinking back, there was a regularity, a sameness about my early childhood. It was down the road each morning to the monkey school. My father called it that because he said the children gibbered about and screeched and hung upside down on the climbing frame in the playground. And anyway, I was always monkey-faced to him when he was in a playful mood, that is, which he often was. The school was really called St. Joseph's, and I was happy there for most of the time. Anyway, after school every day, whatever the weather, I'll be off down to the recreation ground for a football with Eddie Dodds, my best friend in the world, and Matt and Bobby and all the others. It was muddy down there. Cross the ball and it would just land and stick. We had our own team, the Mudlarks, we called ourselves, and we were good. And we were good too. Visiting teams seemed to expect the ball to bounce for some reason, and by the time they realised it didn't, we were often 2 or 3 goals up. We weren't so good away from home. Every weekend, I did a paper round from Mr. Paddle's shop on the corner. I was saving up for a mountain bike. I wanted to go mountain biking up on the moors with Eddie. The trouble was, I would keep spending what I'd saved. I'm still the same that way. Sundays were always special. I remember we'd go dinghy sailing, all of us, on the reservoir. Stella Artois barking her head off at the other boats, else they'd no right to be there. My father loved it, he said, because the air was clear and clean, no brick dust. He worked down on the brickworks. He was a great do-it-yourself fanatic. There was nothing he couldn't fix, even if it didn't need fixing, so he was in his element on a boat. My mother, who worked part-time in the office at the same brickworks, revelled in it too. I remember her once throwing back her head in the wind and breathing in deep as she sat at the tiller. "This is it," she cried. "This is how life is supposed to be. Wonderful, just wonderful." She always wore the blue cap. She was the unsuspicious skipper. If there was a breeze out there, she'd find it and catch it. She had a real nose for it. We had some great days on the water. We'd go out when it was rough, when no one else would, and we would go skimming over the waves, exhilarating in the speed of it, and the sheer joy of it. And there wasn't a breath of wind that didn't mind either. Sometimes we'd be the only boat on the whole reservoir. We'd just sit and fish instead. By the way, I was better at fishing than either of them, as Stella Artois would be curled up behind us on the boat, bored with the whole thing, because there was no one to bark at. Then the letter arrived. Stella Artois savaged it as it came through the letterbox. There were puncture holes in it, and it was damp, but we could read enough. The brickworks were going to close down. They were both being made redundant. There was a terrible silence at the breakfast table that morning. After that, we never went sailing on Sundays anymore. I didn't have to ask why not. They both tried to find other jobs, but there was nothing. A creeping misery came over the house. Sometimes I'll just come home and they wouldn't be speaking. They'd argue a lot, just about niggly little things, and they'd never been like that. My father stopped fixing things around the house. He was scarcely ever home anyway. If he wasn't looking for a new job, he'd be down in the pub. When he was at home, he'd just sit there, flicking through the endless yachting magazines and say nothing. I tried to stay out of the house and play football as much as I could, but then Eddie moved away because his father had found a job somewhere down south. Football just isn't the same without Eddie. The Mudlarks disbanded. Everything was falling apart. Then one Saturday I came home from my paper route and found my mother sitting at the bottom of the stairs and crying. She'd always been so strong. I'd never seen her like this before. Silly beggar, she said. Your dad's a silly beggar. Michael, that's what he is. What's he done? I asked her. He's gone off, she told me, and I thought she meant for good. He wouldn't hear her reason. Oh no. He's had this idea, he says. He wouldn't tell me what it was, only that he sold the car and we're moving south. He's going to find us a place. I was relieved, and quite pleased really. South must be nearer to Eddie. She went on. He thinks I'm leaving this house. Then I'm telling you, he's got another thing coming. Why not, I said. Not much here. Well, there's a house for a start. Then there's Gran, and there's school. Well, there's the house for a start. Then there's Gran, and there's school. There's other schools, I told her. She became streaming angry then, angrier than I've ever known her. You want to know what was the last straw? She said. It was you, Michael, getting off on your paper round this morning. You know what your dad said? Well, I'll tell you, shall I? Do you know something? He says. There's only one lousy wage coming into this house, Michael's paper money. How do you think that makes me feel, eh? My son's 11-year-old. He's got a job, and I haven't. She steadied herself for a moment or two before she went on, her eyes filled with fierce tears. I'm not moving, Michael. I was born here, and I'm not going. No matter what he says, I'm not leaving. I was there when the phone call came a week or so later. I knew it was my father. My mother said very little, so I couldn't understand what was going on. Until she sat me down afterwards and told me. He sounds different, Michael. I mean, like his old self, his very, very old self. Like he used to be before when I first knew him. He's found us a place. Just pack your bags and come, he says. Fareham, somewhere near Southampton. Right on the sea, he says. There's something very different about him, I'm telling you. My father did indeed seem a changed man. He was waiting for us when we got off the train. All bright-eyed and full of laughter. He helped us with the cases. It's not fair. It's not far, he said, ruffling my hair. You wait till you see it, monkey face. I've got it all sorted, the whole thing, and it's no good you trying to talk me out of it either of you. I've made up my mind. What about? I asked him. I made my mind up. What about? I asked him. You'll see, he said. Stella Troy bounded along ahead of us, her tail held high and happy. We all felt like that, I think. In the end, we couldn't bust because the cases were too heavy. When we got off, we were right by the sea. There didn't seem to be any houses anywhere, just a yachting marina. What are we doing here? My mother asked. There's someone I want you to meet, a good friend of mine. She's called Peggy Sue. She's been looking forward to meeting you. I've told her all about you. My mother frowned at me in puzzlement. I wasn't any the wiser either. All I knew for certain that he was being deliberately mysterious. We struggled on with our suitcases, the gulls crying overhead, the yacht masts clapping around us, and Stella yapping at all of it, until at last He stopped by a gangplank that led up to a gleaming dark blue yacht. He put the cases down and turned to face us. He was grinning from ear to ear. "Here she is," he said. "Let me introduce you. This is the Peggy Sue, our new home." "Well?" Considering everything, my mother took it pretty well. She didn't shout at him. She just went very quiet and stayed quiet all through his explanation, down in the galley over a cup of tea. It wasn't a spur of the moment thing, you know. I've been thinking about it for a long time, all those years working in the factory. All right. Maybe I was just dreaming about it in those days. Funny when you think of it. If I hadn't lost my job, I never have dared to do it. Not in a million years. He knew he wasn't making much sense. All right then. Here's what I thought. What is it that we all love doing the most? Sailing, right? Wouldn't it just be wonderful, I thought, if we could just take off and sail around the world? There's people who've done it. Blue water sailing, they call it. I've read about it in the magazines. Like I said, it was just a dream to start with. And then, no job and no chance of a job. What did the man say? Get on your bike. So why not a boat? I'm going to stop there and read the rest in the next episode. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.